Yeah, welcome Mel, welcome Sonya, to this DevSecOps webinar with TryHackMe and Snyk. I'm really excited to have you both here. Before we get started into some of the questions that we've taken from the TryHackMe community, from a lot of frequently asked questions online, from Reddit and LinkedIn forums and such, I thought it'd be great if we could just kick off with a really quick round of introductions. So my name is Billy, and one of the great things about my job is I get to put together events like these where we're focusing on a different career path or a different sort of theme through cybersecurity. Today we're talking about DevSecOps, and yeah, just really excited to learn from both of you with your kind of experiences and to tackle some of these frequently asked questions online. Sonya, should we move to you next?
Sure, I can go next. So I'm Sonya. I'm a senior security advocate at Snyk, also a GitHub Stars and an Open UK Security Advisory Board member. I do have a great passion for DevSecOps, cybersecurity, and AI. I did work a lot around security in open source, and always glad to have these discussions with other people. So yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah, so I'm Mel. I work as a content engineer at TryHackMe, and I've worked for the past 2 years developing the DevSecOps pathway that we just released. And I'm very happy to be here to talk about DevSecOps.
Yeah, this is awesome. And just for people that are watching as well, we really want this to be as accessible as possible to anyone, regardless of the amount of knowledge you already have about DevSecOps as a potential career path, or just as something intellectually that you might be interested in. And so to that end, we want to start out maybe by tackling some preliminary questions, just for people who are starting maybe from like baseline, sort of very little to no knowledge. So I think the first one that I'd love to bring in then would be quite simply, what is DevSecOps?
Yeah, I can start answering this question. So DevSecOps is a software development approach that integrates security practices within DevOps process. So it's an extension of DevOps, and it aims to prioritize security throughout the software development lifecycle, improve DevOps as a whole, and just ensure that you are deploying secure code.
Awesome. And as a follow-up question, I guess we talked about how essential it is throughout the software development process to make sure that every step of the way, every tool that's being used is secure for I guess any number of teams that might be using it. Is this specialization exclusive to people who come from a software development background, or are there other potential routes in?
I think for this specialization is not only for software developers, obviously, because we're talking about DevSecOps, and as you mentioned, Melanie, we're also including security professionals as well, because they're in this feedback loop with developers. We can also include QA, so quality assurance engineer as well, all the people from SRE for the infrastructure. So it's more like a platform engineering team where you have all of these different roles to have that constant feedback loop. So I'd say it's if you are interested in DevSecOps, you might be thinking of other routes, not only software development first.
What skills do I need? I know you just listed a few examples there, but maybe if we take this just a little bit broader as well and talk about some of the soft skills that are also quite relevant, right? Because I think, again, at least through my own kind of following through like the Reddit forums and through LinkedIn forums, it's also about, I guess, getting a culture of security awareness going sort of across teams, right? So I think there's also like a soft skills element to it too. But yeah, maybe if either of you want to sort of take the start on this one, what you would consider to be the sort of a good cluster of hard skills, and then maybe a good cluster of soft skills would set you up best for success.
Yeah, I can piggyback off my answer. So I think you need to definitely be able to adapt and have an open mind. I think DevSecOps is a Swiss Army knife role in the sense that everything you learn from other fields is definitely useful because in itself is an extension of DevOps. It's an ever-growing framework set of practices, and it's an extension of, in itself, roles are quite technical, maybe from software engineering or DevOps kind of type of roles. So if you have a background in DevOps, cloud security, coding, not necessarily has to be from security, I think is super useful. And then from there you can scale up on more of the security side. But I don't think you need to be a security person specifically to be able to be in this role. And in terms of soft skills, I think having an open mind and adaptability is essential for this.
Awesome. Yeah, and I guess it speaks to your own experience, Sonya, with not having to necessarily start out as a DevSecOps or DevOps person, right? Your own experience as a software engineer first, and then just having those right conversations that got you interested.
Sure. Also, I do think that know how to communicate and collaborate with other teams, because DevSecOps is all about collaborating with different teams. So this is really important to know how to communicate with different teams at different levels. Also, how to you would convey different vulnerabilities or issues. It could be really technical if you're talking to engineers, but it'll be not that technical if you're obviously addressing to executives, or if you have to present to the boards. You'll need to adapt your findings. So yeah, also having that skill is quite important.
Yeah, awesome. So yeah, if you're communicating with engineers, being able to kind of use that technical terminology that they will understand, but also equally being able to translate that for people who are obviously stakeholders, but don't necessarily need the terminology in the first place. They just need to sort of know the high level, what changes you've made, or yeah, what you've implemented. I just want to ask another question about maybe from the employer perspective. So this one is kind of like a two-parter, and it's more for why should businesses be investing in DevSecOps, and then maybe flipping it back over to the other side of the aisle again, why people should pursue this as a career.
So I'd say on the business perspective, obviously having enhancing their security posture is quite important due to potentially compliance reasons. So they'll need to actually follow some compliance requirements. So depending if it's a GDPR, if they're in part of a specific industry. So let's say if it's healthcare, they'll need to follow HIPAA requirements or different. So each industry would have their own requirements to follow up. And this would actually drive the security posture and the security program that will actually need to implement these frameworks. So there's a big compliance reason for business to actually implement security within their DevOps practices. There's also cost efficiency, because if you actually find a security vulnerability down the pipeline, it will cost much more to actually fix it when it's on production than if you actually catch it at the beginning of your pipeline. So let's say potentially in your IDE or when you raise a pull request, because you already have those tools that actually give you that visibility. So obviously cost efficiency is also a good one for business. And I think at the end of the day, it's also about reputation and trust, because they potentially don't want to be on the front page in the news, because they don't want to have a bad reputation, potentially attacked with phishing emails or ransomware or malware. So having also that reputation and build trust with their customers would be quite important as well from business point of view.
Yeah, awesome.
Yeah,
Sorry,
absolutely. And just wanted to add on the cost side of things, I think there was a study by IBM where it showed how much it costs to solve defects at each stage, and I think it could be up to 100 more times in costs when you're identifying and fixing issues in maintenance and operations phases, as opposed to during fixing them during design or even implementation phases. So cost effective is way more cost effective.
Yeah, I'd actually like to maybe just stick with this theme of cost effectiveness just for one extra question, because I think it links quite nicely to something that I had a bit further down, but maybe this is just too convenient a time to bring it back up. And I guess the talking about kind of only trying to fix issues once they've already kind of been launched is a very ineffective way of trying to resolve something, and it kind of mirrors maybe the transformation of how development teams release things and how that kind of process has changed over time. So I guess it's more of a terminology question, but wondering, Mel, if you could take this one for us. Can we recap maybe the differences between waterfall, agile, and DevOps approaches to software development, and maybe how the cost effectiveness kind of links into this?
So the waterfall model, it was kind of how project management was approached in the 70s. It's been there for a long time, and it was very hierarchy based. So each member in the team had a specific responsibility, and each one of these hierarchy steps relied on the previous one. So you had sysadmins trying to keep everything running smoothly. You had QA, and the issue with this is that there wasn't a specific role or even step to focus on fixing flaws or bugs. So there was a lot of blame games. It was very unclear as to who would fix the flaws, and it just wasn't taken into account at all. So as you go through this hierarchy of developing software, there was quite a lot of holding back, blame games, and a lot of friction between the teams because security wasn't even considered.
Let alone siloed workflows without any narrative.
It just wasn't part of the conversation.
Sure.
So it kind of became a big driver to redesign how you do software development. And that's when the Agile module started. So it was sort of implemented in the early 2000s, and there was a manifesto released, and it focused a lot on what you call agile development. So it wanted to improve the way individuals collaborated with each other, instead of who used what tool or who was in charge of what process. It was all about communication and being a bit more flexible. So what Sonya mentioned earlier about communication being a key skill for a DevSecOps engineer, this is definitely something really important, and is something that Agile module started introducing. So instead of relying on self-organization, it was driving team collaboration a bit more and responding to change instead of just following a planned hierarchy of software development. And then it fixed a few issues when it came with flexibility and communication, but security still wasn't introduced officially. And DevOps sort of was born out of Agile in a way. After discussing the drawbacks of Agile, DevOps was sort of coined. It was more of a cultural change for efficiency. So instead of all teams working on a single project, it wanted to implement a bit more integration and automation into these processes. So automation was a really big driver in DevOps, and it started introducing new tools and new frameworks to reduce manual labor. And this is where pipelines, automation, CICD, and all these terms that we hear in DevSecOps appeared. When it comes to cost, throughout the developing of these frameworks, in Waterfall, a lot of processes were manual. There was a lot of time lost because of the lack of collaboration, so that slowed down the software development process. When Agile was introduced, that was reduced because the way teams work was significantly more collaborative, so that helped with cost and the time to release software. And then with DevOps, because you're introducing automation and pipelines and CICD and all these tooling, development was even faster. So that also helped with costs. But then you had the issue of security, where if there was a flaw, it would cost a lot of money for the company in terms of brand reputation and things like that.
Awesome. Thank you very much for running us through that. And you touched on a few of the sort of we're getting more into the sort of technical side now of DevSecOps, and I think maybe this is a great time to kind of transition into some of this next kind of category of questions, which is a bit more, the step up for people that have a bit more of a baseline knowledge around DevSecOps. Obviously, we can see, as you've just kind of recapped, Mel, the improvement that the DevOps workflow has brought into the software development process. But of course, vulnerabilities can still leak in. And so the next question is, what are some of the common ways that vulnerabilities can still leak into the development process? And I guess where DevSecOps professionals just have to be super vigilant.
Sure. So I would say on that side, when we see vulnerabilities, that it can link potentially for developers because they might not have sufficient security training, so they're not aware of security best practices around common vulnerabilities, for example, and they don't have that visibility. So going back to what Mel mentioned around automation is one of the big principles of DevSecOps, and having these tools at different stages of the pipeline will actually help through this catching those leaks in the development process. So this could be, for example, a developer which is pushing credentials, plain text credentials. If you do have tools implemented in your pipeline, they will actually catch it before being pushed to a GitHub repo, because we don't want to have credentials or API keys or these kind of secrets pushed to a GitHub repository, even if it's in private. Because we did have an instance with Uber that actually had their AWS credits that were tampered with, because actually they had repo on the private visibility, and one of the engineers actually switched that visibility to public. And that usually attackers will scrap GitHub just to have that harvest credentials on this platform. So they actually managed to capture their credentials and tamper with the AWS and GitHub actions. So this is really important to have tools that will actually catch or block this kind of examples that we have. So this is for secrets, but obviously if we're talking about security best practices more in the coding process, you'd have also tools. So this would depend through your IDE or CLI when you're raising a pull request, or within your CICD pipeline. This would depend on where you actually have those entry points to position your tools. And also there's third-party packages, because you might be using packages because you don't want to run the wheel. You already have those in your ecosystem that you're using. So let's say if you're using a JavaScript, you might be using NPM packages, and you're not only implementing one, you're implementing dozens or maybe hundreds of packages just to implement features. And this is also due to because we want to ship fast, so we don't have time to actually create all of the features, and we'll leverage those packages. But obviously those packages might have bugs or vulnerabilities that we don't know, we're not aware of, we don't have visibility. So having those tools also, security tools within the pipeline, will give you that visibility. So within the again, the CLI, the ID, your dashboard. So depending where you have your endpoints and your entry points for your different tools, having that visibility is also quite important, and it will prevent all of these leaks in the development process. And we can also push to let's say containers and IAC, because we've actually talked about third parties and coding, but also on the IAC level of containers. Obviously containers, you will have to check if there's any vulnerabilities on the image that you're fetching, and on the IAC you'll have to check if there's any drifts in your YAML file, for example. If there's something that has been changed, even if your process is fully automated, you might have drifts sometimes. So having those tools at different stages, they'll help you catch all of these little leaks, will help you having that full process.
So yeah, you've both mentioned CICD pipeline in your responses over the last sort of 15 minutes or so, and I have a few questions queued up again, just based around this topic. But before we maybe get into any specific matters with CICD, could you explain to us, Mel, kind of what we mean by this term?
Yeah, so CICD, it stands for Continuous Integration and Continuous Deployment, and it's a term that you frequently see when you're talking in the context of pipelines. Integration and deployment, it refers to managing the frequent merging of code, and if you want to add testing in an automated manner to perform checks, you can do it through CICD pipeline. So as you go through through the stages of integrating and deploying code, you can add a series of steps where you can perform different types of testing. You can verify pushing of new code, and after you run all these checks, you can then choose to merge the code and update the code base. And this is used by companies when they want to push new features to their apps and things like that. This makes code change very dynamic, and CI/CD is very important in DevSecOps because it helps detect bugs early by adding a series of security checks and steps, and it helps maintaining modular code at a massive level, at a bigger scale. And it introduces also concepts like rolling back versions of code and things like that.
So yes, I guess when you were talking earlier about some of the flaws behind like the waterfall and agile approaches, I guess it's because they don't allow for a process like this, right? Which is where this is how we get to detect the vulnerabilities. And as you say, even roll back code just to really make sure everything is airtight before progressing to the next stage.
Yeah, exactly. So even the term that you mentioned, rolling back, that introduces so much flexibility that you just didn't have in waterfall, for example, which was such a hierarchy fixed workflow for developing code. So yeah, for example, rolling back and being able to restore a version, that just adds so much flexibility.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for that. And then maybe just to move straight into this next question, could we look at some best practices for making sure that the CI/CD pipeline is configured properly, and maybe any risks that are associated if this is not followed?
I would say the first step is making sure that you have a good implementation of the tool, and so for that, because you'd like to implement the tool and the developers to use that tool as well, because we're talking about DevSecOps, so everyone is using the tools. I would say to actually explain the why you're actually implementing this tool, because instead of just dropping the tool to developers, they will not use it, or try to bypass some of the checks. So explain the why you actually this will bring values, this will actually help the developers in their development process. And I would say also, before implementing a tool, spend some time with the developer team just to understand their workflow, their backlog, how they actually work together, what are their pain points, just to see if by implementing the new tools, you can actually also make sure you're not adding more pressure to the team, but just actually help them and bring value. So implementation is really important. And also, instead of dumping the tool to all of your engineers, I would recommend to actually start with a smaller team. So this would be like your guinea pig team that actually are quite keen using security tools, or did you have that appetite, or quite open to these tools. So having like success story, like a good business case also that you can also implement to other teams. So with this team, you actually implement the tool, explain the why, open the tool to them so they can have access to the dashboard, to the workflow. They can implement it. They can raise a pull request and see how it works if they're using GitHub Actions or other entry points that you have on the pipeline. So they have a play with the tool. And when they're satisfied and you have this success story, then you can have that iterative approach and open up to the other teams. So this is also part of the implementation step, just to have something a little bit more successful. And then you can also see what kind of threshold you can apply, because you don't want to have gates. Obviously, you don't want to block production by pushing something to production. So having those discussions with the engineer to understand what are the thresholds when they're testing, when they have like different environments, and where you can have those guardrails. Because we shouldn't talk about gates, like security gates. I don't like that term. It's more about guardrails and having that visibility and have proper thresholds. So obviously, if you have criticals or high vulnerabilities, you can have like different SLAs to fix those. Obviously, this could be a priority for the team, but having those requirements that you've actually discussed with the engineer that make sense for everyone will make the implementation more successful, and you make sure also that it's configured properly, because you're not setting the threshold, the settings by yourself as a security point of view, but as the DevSecOps, all the teams that are part of that DevSecOps process.
Great, awesome, and yeah, and maybe just to contextualize all of this with an example. Could we look at, I think Mel, there might be an example that you can use here of a CICD pipeline in action.
Yeah, there's actually a room in TryHackMe, part of the DevSecOps pathway, called CICD and Build Security, and it walks you through how to create a pipeline, all the stages that you can implement, and how you can add security to each stage. So this is the room, the CICD and Build Security. So it walks you through how a pipeline can be configured using GitLab. And throughout the room, you learn how to set up each of these stages and what you can do in them, and how you can, I guess, shift left and add security to each stage. I won't go through it now, but I highly recommend completing this room and going through it. And you have a very hands-on deep dive into how a CI/CD pipeline is built, how it works, and it really does give you an inside view into how all of this works.
Yeah, awesome. And this almost touches on another question that we just didn't get time to get to today, which is more about if I am interested in the like trying this from a practical perspective, like, is it something where I have to just kind of keep badgering the DevSecOps team at my company to try and get involved? But I guess it's maybe some educational content like this where you can start to try it on for size, like getting involved with your like DevSecOps hat for the first time.
Yeah, I can answer that one. I'm just also sharing my screen because we did show what happened on GitLab, and that's actually a good way to also see how it works on GitHub. So basically, what I would recommend is for those of you who are interested in DevSecOps, if you are following any tutorial that will help you build an application, this is a good starting point. So at least you have an application to where you can implement that CI/CD pipeline. So once you have that application, what I would recommend is actually go through the marketplace, the GitHub marketplace, and you have a lot of these tools that you could potentially implement within your CI/CD pipeline. And as you can see here on the left side, you have each of the steps that you can implement. So code quality, code review, code integration, with different tools, security as well. And the good news is that actually all of these tools that you might probably be using in company, they're all free for open source or public repos. So you can actually go on this GitHub marketplace, install them, have a play with them, just to feel how you can implement these tools. And you can also do it in complement with some of the rooms on TryHackMe. For example, if you want to implement Circle CI, you can just implement it within your projects and see how it works with the different orbs. If you want to implement something on the security side, you can implement Snyk, you can implement Snyk and different tools. You can also use, for example, for dependency managements. Obviously, I would recommend to implement Snyk, but jokes aside, you might be also adding different tools to see the different kind of results that you're getting, the different database that each of these tools are tapping in. So I would recommend to do so because, as I said, they're free. So it's a good way to actually leverage these tools, to have them on your CV, because you did have that practical use of these tools. And also not only implementing, but also what you can do is, if we're talking about dependency management, how you would do a vulnerability triaging. This is also a good thing that you could potentially bring to the company, because you might have a lot of vulnerabilities on your dependencies within your application. So how do you triage them? Which one are you actually going to fix? So this is also all the thought process behind not just implementing the tools for just the sake of implementing these tools, but also how you would actually use them within a company. And one more thing that I would recommend, if you can do this, is also implement chat ops. So you can create a free Slack workspace. And what you can do is actually start integrating all of these tools within your free Slack workspace, and see how it works. So like what kind of alerts and notification you will get, because obviously you'll have all of this automation workflow within your company, and you might not, if you're students or if you you want to transition to DevSecOps, you won't have access as like a professional ecosystem. So this is a great opportunity if you want to test all of those webhooks and automation process. Just starting with a simple application, like create your CICD pipeline, do chat ups with the Snyk and GitHub integration, and just test. This is really great project that you would present to your to any of the recruiters, because this is a project that you've built. You've actually have a hands-on experience on all of the tools that you've implemented, and this is a little bit more concrete than just saying I've built a to-do app and push it on Netlify. You'll have like something a little bit more concrete and tangible for the recruiters. If you don't know where to start, if you don't have any application, you can start with the OWASP application. You can use all of the OWASP GOAT application if you want the starting points. If you don't want to build the application from scratch, but you still want to build that CICD pipeline, that could potentially be one solution if you want to have an application.
Yeah, this is great. I mean, outside of just DevSecOps, just in general, one of the kind of most frequently asked questions we get at TryHackMe is just how do I start putting practical experience on my CV? So I think this resource in particular is also great because, as you say, like you can for free as well. Like the barrier to entry is very low to start kind of playing around with some of these really powerful tools. I've got two questions left. One for each of you. I think the first one is for you, Mel. And it is about the shift left approach to security and how, I guess, when it comes to assessing security flaws, how shift left is maybe a better approach than traditional ways of assessment.
Yeah, I think this concept gets thrown around a lot. I think the name comes from, if you think about the DevOps stages from plan, design, develop, test, all the way to monitoring. I think in the traditional quality model, all the checks and QA were towards the end of the DevOps phases. So kind of like in the test and deploy release stages. And shifting left just means introducing security checks from the start. So you're sort of shifting, I guess, left and adding security to each stage of the life cycle. So I think this is one of the things why DevSecOps became its own framework and concept. So it was one of the main drivers to extend DevOps into DevSecOps because you're essentially introducing security testing and security check at each stage, all the way from the plan and design stages, very early on in the inception of the lifecycle towards the end. So yeah, it means exactly that, just introducing security at each stage. And this is going back to the cost effectiveness and reducing cost that we were talking about earlier. Since it's introduced very early, risks are reduced massively. So you won't find out about flaws when you're in the deploying or the monitoring stages.
Cool. So always about just trying to intercept any kind of flaws as early as possible. Shift left, just really getting ahead of any mistakes before they become too costly. Cool. I guess just for the final question, it would not be a webinar in 2024 if we didn't talk about AI at some point. And Sonya, I know that you've spoken in previous events about vulnerabilities from AI-generated code, which is now a whole, extra bucket of worms, can of worms. But maybe they become as big as a bucket of worms that this kind of introduces. So I guess, what are the common pitfalls in AI gen code, and maybe what are some of the best solutions that people have come up with for getting around them?
Sure. So when we're talking about Gen AI codes, I'm referencing code generated by, for example, GitHub Copilots. I'm not talking about ChatGPT, Gemini, and others, because actually, if you're copy pasting proprietary code within ChatGPT, Gemini, and others, you actually breaching your IP, your intellectual property. You shouldn't do this. This is already a red flag. But if you're using GitHub Copilot within the context of your company, so what I would recommend is basically to have, because we're mentioning about CICD pipeline, is you have those security tools within your pipeline to actually give you visibility on the quality of the code that is produced. Because will potentially see that it's great to scaffold applications, to create README files, to create documentation. It's really great on developer point of view in terms of productivity and efficiency. This is a great tool for developers, but we need to keep in mind that we shouldn't over-rely on these tools, and always make sure to cross-check the output through a security tools, just to make sure that there's no vulnerabilities that will be integrated within the code base. And this goes regardless of if it's coming from GenAI, from GitHub Copilot, from Stack Overflow, or from a developer. You should always actually check any code that is produced through your pipeline. So I'd say the biggest pitfall is just to over-rely and blindly trust the output from these tools. Just always make sure to double-check, always verify what is produced.
Right, GenAI is a co-pilot and not a someone to take over the entire plane. Well, thank you both very, very much for staying on for an extra 20 minutes. I really appreciate you've been able to participate in today, and we've got through so many of the questions that we got prepared from across the internet and across the TryHackMe community as well. So thank you so much for that. And have a great rest of your day, and I look forward to potentially collaborating on something again in the future.